Well, after all of the chaos and the instability and don't know what we call what happened in Tshwane last week, also plenty of evidence that after the recent change of administration in Joburg, officials are being moved around there. As you know, there's no mayor, no speaker in Tshwane. Joburg recently changed hands from an administration led by the DA to one now including the ANC and the EFF. In both of these cases, smaller parties played a huge role, particularly COPE and the Patriotic Alliance. Professor Kedibone Phago is the director of the School of Government Studies at the University of Northwest. Professor, good afternoon to you and thank you for your time. We have this issue in two separate metros now. We've seen similar things happening in Nelson Mandela Bay, where parties, where the people in power change so quickly. Do you think we're going to be stuck in this position for some time to come? The pendulum will swing one way and then the other.
Thank you, Stephen. Good afternoon and to you and to your viewers at home. And thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. I agree, we are going to be with this matter for quite some time at this point, as you see what is happening in Joburg and in Tshwane, and as you rightly say, in other metros, because it is very clear that South Africa has entered a situation that allows coalitions, and for the foreseeable future, I think if we analyze the trends on the elections, both on local government, but also the general elections, it is very clear that we are much likely to experience this for the longest time. Yeah.
I mean, one of the questions is what happens with smaller parties. If you look at COPE, the Patriotic Alliance, at changing sides, I don't know if they did it for voters. I mean, would I be too cynical to say they did it for themselves? How do you see their behavior?
So I think we are in trouble, to say the least, as citizens. And this is because we go to elections and our interest is really to see the functioning local government system. And so we have an opportunity to reflect and look at the various political party manifestos and make informed decisions. So I think what we have now with all these coalitions, with all these smaller parties, it's for them to go there and represent the will of the people, their voters. And it's very sad that, and not just small parties, but also the bigger parties are really playing with South Africans, and largely the kind of a game that we see is more of a political expediency, and so that means they are much more interested in benefiting either politicians or political parties and not citizens. So we should find ways as citizens to put some pressure, and I think conversations like this on platforms such as Newzroom Afrika makes that provision that we need to make our voices heard and put pressure so that politicians are aware wherever they are that the citizens are not sleeping, we are conscious of our rights, and we know that they need to be servicing the citizens rather than playing this to really delay service delivery. So I agree fully with your sentiments, Stephen.
I think many people might say, well, look, all I can do is vote every 5 years or maybe every 2 or 3 years, depending on how it works out. But is there anything else that citizens or civil society can really do? Any ways that people can be more active in things that really affect them?
I think so. I think there are a number of interventions, and at least 2 in my mind for now, that we need to push hard on the professionalization of the local government sector. And so I'm not even sure at this point in time that what led to coalitions is the fact that people are losing trust in political parties, and there are numbers, statistics that has actually demonstrated that people are losing confidence in political parties, and these are political parties across the board, not just the ruling party. So this is, for me, a very important factor, that for us to be able to insulate our democracy and our institutions from political interference, we need to find ways that can help us to professionalize local government. The second point is perhaps we also need to organize much more robustly. I think South Africans are divided. The middle class is too busy with its business of the day, and we have completely disengaging in the sense that we are not using public services like public health, public education systems, and that are major factors in actually allowing the downfall of our local government system.
So we need to get more involved. I mean, what we see, and I think this affects people from all classes of society, is that fewer people vote. Because, you know, they just think they don't like any of the political parties. We actually need to reverse that. We need to get more involved, not less.
Yes, Stephen, but I'm not sure if we can use the issue of voter apathy as a scapegoat or as a reason that is derived from poor performance or governance, because even in major democracies that have developed over many years, they have been experiencing this low voter turnout for quite some time. So it looks like it may be a norm, and we need to look at some of the factors that actually can be attributed to that. My concern, my worry is that we need to engage in proper platforms that can generate leadership that would have South Africa's interest at heart, because all of us, we are going to lose out if the system of governance, if our public institutions are not going to function efficiently and optimally. So it is in our best interest that we get involved in one way or the other, so that we can pressurize those who are in the leadership positions, especially politicians, to understand that it is just in our interest that this system of governance should work, so that it is able to produce functional systems and service delivery.
Is leadership an element in this? I mean, do we have short-sighted leaders? I mean, people making coalitions with people who we just know, I mean, it's not going to work in the longer run.
So I think one of the major factors, as you correctly point out, that is playing itself out in these kind of arrangements, coalitions, arrangements between smaller parties, it is really a question of leadership. So if, for example, you refer to the two cases of Joburg and Tshwane, where a mayor comes from a minor, a smaller political party, it can tell you so much about the quality of leadership we have in place. And so, as South Africans, I think we need to voice our concerns and say, what should be the ideal, and talk to officials in the institutions in COCTA, in SALGA, and ask them, how do they perceive and how do they want to professionalize the system, because they are the custodian of this. They are using taxpayers' money to run our local government sector. So they need to come and answer. They need to respond to this and say, what plans do they have in place? Because if we are nurturing a system that is as corrupt as it is, that is not as efficient as it is now, and there are no consequences to the leaders, and we don't take them to task, Stephen, we're going to have a very tough time in the next few years.
Professor, I mean, I think you're right, I'm afraid. I wonder if a bit more transparency might help. At the moment, and this may be controversial, but at the moment, when councillors vote for a mayor, is through a secret ballot. And that's what's led to the situation in Tshwane, where Action SA, is literally trying to use a lie detector test because they believe that some of their councillors, or maybe DA councillors, voted sort of the wrong way, and deliberately so. This is the problem. Do we need to rethink that? I mean, if a councillor is elected to represent a community, should that community see which way they vote?
So that is telling. The Tshwane case is really telling, Stephen. It tells us that our accountability systems and structures needs to up the ante. So, for example, if a mayor is elected and their shenanigans comes out from a citizen, it tells you that IEC needs to up the game to vet these people. They need to conduct regular audits and make sure that the kind of leadership we have actually been subjected to the process, at least to some, basic extent. So for me, these are things that were not even supposed to be coming out at this particular point in time. And so we have to find ways to make sure that these systems, our public institutions, our structures can live up to the expectations to not just deliver democracy for South Africans, but to maintain it. So IEC must take responsibility for some of these things that are coming out. You remember that there are other MMCs that have been, and even in some cases outside Gauteng, mayors that have been convicted. So IEC needs to issue out statements and tell us why these people are there, what has cleared them, so that as South Africans we know that our system can keep these politicians at least to some minimum, accountability systems.
Professor Kedibone Phago, thank you, Director of the School of Government Studies at the University of North West. So much more to talk about, actually. Really do appreciate the time.